What's the biggest mistake you've made at work? I'm a teacher. I had a particularly difficult student who gave me a very hard time on an unusually hard day early in my career. After class let out, another colleague stopped by, and without thinking I said, "Nobody wants that difficult kid in their class. It's hopeless." He was walking in the room to apologize and heard me. However withdrawn and difficult he was before this, it multiplied tenfold, and I felt terrible. I tried to apologize to him, but he didn't want to hear it. After that, I didn't breathe a negative word about a child on school grounds. As an educator, you have to learn sooner or later that your students are the ones who get to act like children, not you.
That's a tough situation. It's interesting how an offhand comment can really change the dynamic between a teacher and a student. It's a lesson learned for sure. Keeping your frustrations in check is important in education. Kids can pick up on that stuff, and it does affect their behavior. Seems like that experience helped you grow as a teacher. It's a reminder that we're all in this together.
I worked at a Best Buy and had just signed out a set of keys to retrieve a high-value product from Cage. Lost the fucking keys. I paced like a madman, try to retrace my steps and find them, but ultimately I went up to my boss and told him I just fucked up. He said, "The keys you signed out had keys to 7 other cages in the warehouse. The value therein is over $400,000. Not to mention the cost of rekeying and relocking is about $1,500 considering parts and labor. PR lock. Do you know how long it would take you to work that off? Did you know that this is an offense that results in immediate termination?" I went pale as a ghost and almost shat my pants. Lucky for you, I saw you set them down where you weren't supposed to, then walk away, so I grabbed them myself and let you worry. This is a cheap lesson. Sign the keys back in TLDR. Lost a set of keys in a big box retailer, put $400,000 plus at risk. Boss had them the whole time, so I'd learned my lesson to keep them on my person at all times when I've signed them out.
That's a tough spot to be in. The pressure of potentially losing that much money would freak anyone out. It's good your boss had a sense of humor about it and was ready to give you a break. I can relate to having moments where you feel like everything's crashing down because of a small mistake. It definitely sticks in your mind to be more careful next time.
Serve at a restaurant with a patio. Seat one guy and tell him I'll be right back with his tea. He's the only guy here. Cash out another customer and then immediately forget about the guy outside and spend a stupid amount of time mixing peanut butter. He walked back through about 10 minutes later saying I'll try again next time.
That's a pretty relatable moment. You think you got it all under control, and then you're distracted by something as simple as mixing peanut butter. That guy probably just wanted a nice cup of tea and some peace. It's funny how easy it is to overlook things when you're busy. At least he was polite about it, but you know he probably left feeling a bit ignored. Happens to the best of us.
So I ordered $10,000 of hydraulic materials, connections, hoses, etc., and had them sent direct to our customer. I forgot to specify to our supplier that no paperwork be sent with the goods. So the customer got our order and read the invoice, seeing we paid $10K. We charged them $45K. We lost a great customer that day. Uneasy face. Edit. If my boss didn't abuse our customer loyalty, I feel it out it'll have never happened.
That's a tough situation. Mistakes with orders can really cost you. It's wild how a simple oversight like not specifying paperwork can lead to losing a client. Trust is key in business, and once that's shaken, it's hard to get back. It seems like the boss's approach didn't help either. It's a reminder that maintaining good relationships with customers is as important as the numbers.
Worked in the frozen department at a grocery store for a few years. The fans circulating the air inside the freezer doors gets jammed from time to time due to ice buildup. Sometimes this ice buildup got to a foot in thickness, so we would just hack away at it with a hammer to break it up. This particular time, the ice built up around one of the copper pipes carrying the coolant gas. I didn't see this and proceeded to chip away. One good swing, and I broke through the ice as well as this pipe. Gas starts shooting out and spooked some nearby customers. The owner was at lunch, so I ran to the closest manager. He just kind of looked at me and said, "Go home. The boss is going to be furious when he sees this." I bolted and started dreading for my shift the next day. See the boss, and he just gives me this look of sheer anger and disappointment. Doesn't say a word to me for a few days, and I just kept my head down. Found out later, I caused $7,000 in damages/repairs, I guess, due to how these freezers were built. He forgave me after all, but I was never allowed to clean up the ice again.
That sounds like a pretty intense experience. I get the rush of adrenaline when something unexpected happens at work. Breaking some equipment and causing big damage is a nightmare for anyone. It's good the boss forgave you eventually, but I can see why you were on edge for a bit. I guess they figured you learned your lesson. Just goes to show how one mistake can impact things way more than you think.
16 years old, it's my first job. Like first week on the first job. Now I've always been tiny, even for a girl. At the time, I'm pretty sure I barely broke 110. My boss wants me to mop the floor before we close. No problemo. I go to get the mop and bucket, and it's the kind of industrial janitorial mop. Okay, it can't be that heavy, right? I could pick this thing up, and I miscalculated how much force it would need to lift it out of the bucket, and I knocked one of the glass light covers off of the wall. It crashed to the floor and shattered, and my manager just started dying laughing. I wanted to sink into the floor. I didn't last too long there.
That's a classic first job moment. Trying to lift something way heavier than you expect can lead to some pretty embarrassing situations. It's tough when you just want to do a good job and then you end up breaking something. Your boss's reaction must have made it even worse. It's funny how stuff like that sticks with you, but it probably helped you laugh about it later on. Not everyone lasts in their first job anyway.
I was working in a meat/dairy warehouse as a checker for a large grocery distribution company. I was responsible for scanning and counting incoming product and logging the expiration dates in the warehouse system. My second week there, in came a full load of imported Australian lamb. Long story short, I misread the expiration date and entered the wrong one into the system. 3 months later, I was called in my boss's office and was told that they discovered 28 pallets of expired lamb, roughly amounting to $550,000. Biggest loss the company had ever seen, but he didn't fire me because it was only my second week and was an honest mistake. 5 years later, I'm at the same company and have been promoted several times. Can laugh about it now, but man, I almost shit myself when I was sitting in my boss's office that day.
That's a wild story. It's crazy how one mistake can lead to such a big situation. It's nice that your boss understood, and you stuck around. Now that you've moved up in the company, I guess it's all part of the learning experience. It's good to find humor in those moments later on. Just goes to show everyone messes up sometimes, especially when they're new.
Created an automated ACH payment system for a small insurance company. It was a Windows system that was fed data from an old PIX mainframe. Mainframes use a thing called implied decimals, wherein they save a byte of space by not including the decimal in currency fields. I didn't know that at the time, so it took 100 times as much as it should have from everyone's bank account the first time it was used in production.
Yeah, I've had my share of tech mishaps too. One time, I set up a schedule for automatic backups but forgot to check the drive space. It was cool at first, until I realized it hadn't backed anything up for weeks because the drive was full. I basically lost a bunch of important files. It taught me to double-check everything, even the small details sometimes.
I'm a mechanical engineer working in a foundry. I transposed 2 numbers on a blend sheet for an alloy. The titanium ingot was made and sent to testing where the mistake was discovered. The cost of my screw-up was just over $1 million in production costs, materials, late delivery, and actual product. Everyone in the plant heard about it. I will always be the girl that made the $1 million paperweight.
That's a tough situation to be in. Mistakes happen, especially in jobs that involve so many details. It's a reminder of how one small error can lead to big consequences. Sounds like you've learned from it, though. People can be pretty forgiving, and it's part of the job. At least you have a story now, even if it's not the best one. Keep moving forward.
Working security on a large event, 60-plus guards, police, military, and federal police. We were on lockdown all day, checked with a bomb dog, and walked through with various commanders and senior officers. New guard led an unknown van into a secure area where VIPs were parking. Didn't inform me till 30 minutes later when I was doing a patrol with some police officers. Shit hit the fan. He got read the riot act. Farewell from the company. Turned out the guy was delivering tools and electrical equipment. Wrong day.
That sounds like a real mess. I can just picture the tension during that lockdown. It's crazy how one mistake can lead to chaos, especially with all those security layers. The new guard probably thought he was just doing his job, not realizing the implications. Being let go must have been tough, but at least it was just tools and not something more serious. Just a reminder how important communication is in those situations.
I work at a Thai restaurant and was refilling a few bottles with coconut milk, but the lid of the big jug it was all in wasn't on as tight as I thought it was. It came off, and I spilled coconut milk all over my self-shirt, shoes, apron, even ran down the back of my neck. Oh, and did I mention I'm a frontman, and I only have one uniform? So, for the rest of the day, I was taking people's orders with big white stains all over my uniform. At least my boss wasn't pissed.
That sounds like a rough day. Getting covered in coconut milk right before a shift isn't great. It's good that your boss took it well. I guess customers might have found it funny, but that's a tough look for a frontman. Having just one uniform makes it worse. At least you have a story to tell now. It's these little mishaps that stick with you, right?
Working in a grocery store backroom, I have seen many a stack of sodas fall down. I think the worst damage was about $3,000 of soda. I never actually caused it before, but I know that those who have done it kept their jobs and were usually some of the better employees. It's also fun to clean on a hot day.
Sounds like working in the grocery store can be a bit crazy sometimes. The soda stacks falling must have been a mess. I guess if you're cleaning it up on a hot day, at least you get a bit of a workout going. It's interesting that even after causing such a big loss, people still kept their jobs. Makes you wonder about the priorities in those places.
I work IT at a bank. I unplugged our core server at 4:45 p.m. on a Friday accidentally while trying to go look at the back of it. The server took 45 minutes to reboot after a dirty shutdown. All of the tellers in all of our branches couldn't go home until the system came back up because they can't leave until everything is balanced, money in drawers against transactions.
That's a tough spot to be in. It's crazy how one small mistake can snowball into something much bigger. I can't imagine the stress everyone felt in that moment, especially on a Friday. It's a reminder to always double-check what you're doing, especially when it comes to important systems. It must have been a long wait for the tellers, and I bet they weren't too happy about it.
I was being trained to sub for different departments and had to go to another store for training. About 2 hours in, sitting on a fabric chair, I start to realize the Crimson Tide was arriving earlier than normal. I excused myself to the bathroom. As I got up, I turned the chair slightly to disguise the large, soaking bloody stain. I tried to salvage the damage in the bathroom, but was too much and tied my overshirt around my waist and basically ran away and didn't come back. I called to say I wasn't feeling well and had to go home that day. I never went back and completed the training. And somewhat unrelated, but I was also sorry for the birds trapped in the store, large hardware store, and would be sneaky and put birdseed on top of tall shelves so they wouldn't starve. I'm not sure if anyone saw me doing that or not.
That's an interesting story. The whole training thing can be stressful, and then that happens. It's tough handling situations like that. You just want to disappear. Tying a shirt around your waist is a classic move. And it's nice you cared about the birds. It's little things like that which show you have a good heart. Sounds like that training had its ups and downs for you.
Not a career-altering mistake, as this was retail, but a huge mistake on my part nonetheless. Years ago, I used to work at Starbucks. I worked an opening shift, and getting there at 5:15 a.m. in the middle of winter meant that I wasn't in the most awake states of mind. We had a drive-through, and I was stationed on it for the day. Now, to help us get through these early mornings, we were allowed, if our supervisor was cool, to make ourselves a drink to keep by the till/slash bar while we worked. I made myself a grande chai latte. I get through about half of it when a customer appears at the drive-through. She orders a grande chai. Tired me makes said chai. Tired me accidentally hands out my half-finished chai to the customer. She drives off, and after a few minutes, I wonder why there is a full chai latte sitting there. Luckily, she never came back to complain, but that was the biggest mistake I made at job. TLDR, made myself a drink at work at Starbucks and accidentally gave my half-finished drink to customer.
I get it. Working early shifts really messes with your brain. I had a similar thing happen at a grocery store job. I was so tired one morning, I scanned the same item twice and ended up giving a customer too much change. The look on their face when I realized was priceless. They probably thought I was just trying to be nice. Luckily, they were cool about it, and I laughed it off. Just part of retail life.
I was transferring 100+ transaction records from a certain company's old database to a new one. I'm doing great until I realized that I forgot to remove the notification settings on the form I was using, so I accidentally sent over 100 emails to the company's vice president. And only knew this because he emailed me asking me to politely stop.
That sounds like a classic mix-up. It's always the small things that can create a bigger mess. Sending that many emails must have made you feel a bit awkward. It's a good reminder to double-check settings before hitting send. At least the VP had a sense of humor about it. Hopefully, you learned something for next time.
Back in the floppy disk, pre-internet days of computers, I was tasked by my job to do a software installation on board a Coast Guard icebreaker. I flew from Ottawa to Halifax. Then I caught a taxi to CFB Shearwater, from where a twin otter flew me 1,000 kilometers north to a town on the border of Quebec and Labrador. From there I was flown by helicopter to do an at-sea landing on the icebreaker. I went down to the engine control room, where the computer was located, and laid out the disks. Disk 1, Disk 2, Disk 3, Disk 4, Disk 6. Disk 5 was still in my computer back in Ottawa.
That's a pretty wild story. Imagine being out there on an icebreaker, just you and the crew, installing software. It's kind of crazy how reliant we are on technology now, but back then it was all about those floppy disks. Losing Disk 5 must have been a real headache too. I can picture you trying to figure out the next step with half the job missing. That's the kind of stuff that sticks with you.
I just started at this company. I was installing a security system in a museum at a new exhibit they were putting up. It was a guy's office who started a famous soda empire. He had this really expensive chair that was from England or something. Worth like 150K. That's how much the museum director told me it was worth. I lost balance on my ladder and planted my foot on that chair to keep from falling, breaking the chair underneath completely. I pushed the bottom back up and got it to stay where it wouldn't fall. Nobody's noticed a thing, and the chair hasn't moved since. Been almost 10 years.
That's a wild story. It's kind of funny how things play out. You think you're just trying to stay upright, and then you end up potentially wrecking a piece of history. I guess the chair has been holding up well. Must be nice to have that secret for so long. Just kicking back with your own little museum mystery. Hope the director never finds out.
This first one isn't mine, but a story I heard from a colleague on a show we both work on. Mine will come after. After finishing work on a TV show late at night, a production assistant was running the camera gear back to the office down a main highway. Little did he know he'd left the trunk of the van open all throughout the drive, and all the gear had fallen out the back on the hour-long trip back. 100K worth of gear, all gone. I think they got one of the cameras back when it was returned to a local police station, but that was it. The crew felt sorry for him and tried to get the production company to give him another chance. But I guess losing such expensive gear is enough to not get you a call back. Now mine. Accidentally slammed my boss's 14-year-old son's fingers in the back door of a camping trailer and crushed his hand/fingers. He was on Air Talent too. Never did find out what happened to him. Poor kid. Edit. Grammar. Stupid iPad keyboard.
That's rough to hear about the PA losing all that gear. Stuff like that can really mess with your career. As for your story, that's pretty wild. Slamming a kid's fingers like that would be hard to shake off. It's never easy when accidents happen, especially involving kids. You probably felt pretty bad about it. These types of things can stick with you, no doubt. Just gotta keep moving forward, I guess.
I ruined about 500 handmade ice cream sandwiches. They were all stacked up in the middle of the walk-in freezer. It was my second day, and I needed to get a tub of some flavor of ice cream, and it was really dimly lit inside the freezer, so I really couldn't see much at all. I was super careful, but one of the trays was barely resting on the tub I needed, which a few feet above my head, so I couldn't really see on top of it. And when I moved the tub, that tray fell and knocked over all of the other ones in the process.
That sounds rough. I can picture the chaos of all those sandwiches piling up. It's always on the second day when things can go sideways. Trying to be careful but still having a big mess unfold. I've had my own mistakes when I started a job, though nothing quite as spectacular. Hope you got the chance to laugh it off afterward.
Testing a data migration. Didn't realize it was pointing at production. Deleted a reference table. No one noticed for an hour. Multi-billion-dollar company made no money for an hour in one of its regions. No repercussions apart from stern talking to because I shouldn't have been able to access the system anyway.
That sounds like a rough spot to be in. Mistakes happen, especially when testing. It's wild how a simple oversight can have such big consequences. The fact that it wasn't noticed for an hour just shows how fragile these systems can be. It's good you didn't face serious repercussions, but I can imagine the tension during that talk. Just a reminder that we all have to double-check our work, no matter what.
Just last week, I was in the lab labeling tomato plants with my coworker when our boss came to check up. Well, I nearly failed high school chemistry, and it showed when I stupidly ate a cracker in front of him. He turned to me, and without letting a single crack show in his happy, yet somehow still super terrifying, demeanor said, "No eating in the lab. If I catch you doing that again, I'll have to fire you." Then he left me to feel stupid for the rest of the day.
That sounds like a tough day. It's awkward when you're just trying to snack and then the boss shows up. It's like a mix of pressure and embarrassment, especially in a lab setting. You'd think it wouldn't be a big deal, but some places take those rules seriously. I guess now you know to keep your snacks away from work. Better luck next time in the lab, I guess.
Not me, but someone in the very large company I worked for. He was the head of foreign currency traders for the bank. They had to report their trades and whether it was successful or not, and by how much. They made a loss, which they didn't want to report, so they only reported the trades that were profitable that day, then traded further using overseas markets which open/close at different times. This allowed them to carry the loss forward while they tried to recoup it, except that made a bigger loss. Need more desperate trades to get the loss back. More losses. Total? 360M. Gone guy got a lot of days off after that, as did the CEO.
That's a wild story. Sounds like a classic case of trying to cover up mistakes but ending up making things worse. Chasing losses usually leads to bigger problems. Just shows how pressure at work can push people to make bad choices. It's crazy how a whole team got caught up in it, and a lot of money vanished. I guess the higher you go, the harder you fall when things go wrong.
I issued out a unit with the wrong blood type when I was training at a blood bank. It didn't get to the patient since there are so many safety nets, checking the forms for any clerical errors and stuff like that. I had to call the hospital and say what happened. I apologized profusely to the relative of the patient because she had to go back to the blood bank and get the correct unit. Fortunately, she was cool and very understanding. It made me avoid reception areas like the damn plague.
That's a pretty intense experience. Mistakes happen, especially during training. It's good that there were checks in place to catch it before it reached the patient. Sounds like the relative was really understanding, which must have been a relief. Avoiding reception areas makes sense after that. It's one of those moments that sticks with you, teaching you to be more careful in the future.
I used to work in a hot foods department in a grocery store when I was 16. When I was first hired, I was given no training and had been tasked with a lot of chores I didn't know how to do, so I just winged it. On my first week on, I had to clean and close the department alone, and I accidentally sprayed all the surfaces with industrial oven cleaner, including the pizza prep tables, tops of deep fryers, food pans, etc. I meant to grab the non-toxic sanitizer beside it, but the bottles were unlabeled and I didn't know the difference. The next day, my manager called me at school to inform me they had to hold off opening for 3 hours while they threw out the contaminated food, re-cleaned all the equipment, and cooked new food. In total, I cost her almost $5,000 because the oven cleaner got in the fryer and had to be replaced, plus losses for man hours, food, delayed opening causing sales shrink. Needless to say, I quit shortly after.
That sounds like a rough experience. I can relate to the feeling of being thrown into the deep end with no clue what to do. Once I messed up at my first job too. I mixed up a delivery order and ended up sending the wrong items. It was a hassle to fix, and I felt terrible. Sometimes you just learn things the hard way, but it sticks with you.
We had 2 planned crashes in the span of a few hours. I was working as a promotions producer in a small news station and had our crew cut into our local commercial break to run a live promo. Except I teased one of the crashes, which took the lives of a former state senator and his wife, but I used video footage from the other accident. Doesn't seem like much, but in news, every little mistake could be potentially devastating.
That sounds intense. Dealing with breaking news can be tough, and mistakes become magnified quickly. It's easy to see how one little error can blow up, especially with something as serious as a plane crash. The pressure in a newsroom during those moments is real. You've got to keep things professional, but it can get overwhelming. Glad it sounds like you made it through that situation.
I was a code monkey for a globally present banking software company. A bug from a project, I had made it through QC. The bug related to debit accounts getting charged overdraft fees. Each instance of incorrectly charged overdraft is a $5,000 fine. Before we fixed the bug, there were over 1,000 instances of incorrect overdraft fees across the nation. Whoops.
That's wild. I can just imagine the stress that caused. Working in software, bugs happen, but that's a big one. Everyone's job is to catch those, and when they slip through, it can lead to serious issues. I guess it was a valuable lesson in double-checking our work and the impact it can have on real people's finances. Glad you managed to fix it after.
I cost our small shop nearly $16,000 after working there for just a few months over forgetting to have a customer sign a form. I was terrified when I went to my bosses about it. Sure, I was going to be fired, /yelled at /etc. No, they fucking praised me for my honesty and told me how proud they were to have me working for them. I love those people.
That sounds like a tough experience at first. Mistakes happen, especially when you're new. It's great to hear your bosses valued your honesty instead of reacting harshly. That kind of support makes a big difference. It must have been a relief to know they appreciate you as part of the team. Building trust like that really strengthens workplace relationships. You're lucky to have supportive people around you.
This wasn't entirely my fault, but at my last job, the work environment absolutely tanked. And since it was my first job out of college, I didn't know how to handle it. Eventually, I was let go for not being a good fit despite the fact that I had worked there for longer than 12 of the 16 people there. A year later, I wrote a scathing review of the company based on my experiences, and one of their clients saw the review and terminated their $60,000 contract, citing my review specifically. The only reason I know about it is because one of my friends / ex-coworkers listened in on the conference call and looked up the review, which I kept vague, but couldn't really have been from anyone but me. The management immediately wrote several very fake-sounding reviews to dilute the ratings, which makes my very long review seem even more accurate, if anything. TLDR, I lost the company a $60,000 contract because of a review.
It's interesting how things unfold. I had a similar situation early in my career where the atmosphere at work was just off. I wasn't really sure how to navigate it. Eventually, I left, and years later, someone I knew mentioned the company was struggling. Turns out, they were getting bad reviews that felt familiar. It's funny how words can affect a business, especially when you think no one is paying attention.
I guess the worst that I ever did was to misunderstand a SKU and ship about $45,000 plus in product that shouldn't have been sent, non-recoverable. I owned up to it as soon as I realized it. The product had left our dock already. My boss was awesome and simply understood that mistakes happen and nothing came from it. The funny thing is, if I had misshipped a $10 item to a customer, his wife would have fired me on the spot, husband and wife combo. He understood that when you're under the gun to move a few $1,000,000 worth of product in one day, sometimes you make mistakes.
Sounds like a tough situation. Mistakes happen, especially when there's pressure. It's good your boss handled it well. A big loss like that can be stressful, but his understanding probably made it easier for you to move on. It's funny how small mistakes can get more attention than big ones sometimes. Overall, it shows that a supportive work environment is important.
Accidentally canceled a guy's internet / phone connection on a Friday while trying to put in a cancellation for 2 months later. Since we rent the last mile infrastructure and the company we rent from is notoriously shit, there was essentially no way to get him back online via landline in less than 4 weeks. So my supervisor gave the guy 500 euros in adjustments so he could buy one of our LTE routers and enough data to get through the 2 months. I got it, well, don't do this next time. The people here are incredibly chill. Helps that we are a contractor for the ISP and we don't have a budget for adjustments. So there was no financial damage to the company that actually employs me and my supervisor.
That's a pretty wild situation. Cancelled the wrong connection and ended up waiting weeks to fix it. At least the guy didn't freak out and understood it wasn't intentional. The company sounds relaxed, too, allowing for a quick solution. Giving him €500 for an LTE router was a decent move. Makes you think about how things can go wrong, but with chill people around, it's not so bad. Lessons learned, I guess.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.